Sigma has long been the budget alternative to more expensive first-party lenses, and when you bought a Sigma lens, you paid somewhere between 50 and 70% of the first-party offering, but you got a lens that still performed very, very well. But in recent times, both Viltrox and TTArtisans have been releasing lenses that fill a very similar niche, but they are as much as 50%, even 25% of the price of those comparable Sigma lenses. To do a little comparison today, I've got the Sigma 30mm, I got the Viltrox 35mm, and I got the TTArtisan 35mm. We're not only going to compare these lenses, we're also going to get a good idea of whether Sigma is still relevant in this ultra budget end of the market. And price is the first thing I should touch on. At the time of releasing this video, the Viltrox is about half of the price of the comparable Sigma lens, and the TTArtisans is about a third of the price. Now, I'll put some links in the description down below to the best prices that I found. I also do have some discount codes, so you'll find those below as well. And when we look at the price, the place that you would think the other two lenses might suffer compared to the Sigma is the build quality. And while I say that they aren't on par with the Sigma, they're not that far behind. And in fact, the TTArtisans is a mostly metal lens, where the Sigma lens is mostly a composite lens. And then the Viltrox lens probably has the weakest build quality. It's mostly made of plastic, but this is part of Viltrox, what they call like ultra light range. So that actually makes that lens lighter than the other two. So there is kind of an advantage there as well. But I don't think any of them feel cheap or junk by any means. Importantly, they all have a polished metal lens mount. So the build quality overall is acceptable on all of them, but I probably would give Sigma the nod, followed by the TTArtisans, and then finally the Viltrox. Now, another thing that's pretty important to understand about these lenses is the ability to update the firmware. And when we look at the Viltrox, you're able to update that via the USB-C port with Windows or Mac. The TTArtisans has a disadvantage here. At the time of shooting this video, it can only be updated via Windows PC. So if you are using a Mac, that might be a bit of a problem for you. The Sigma lens firmware can be updated via Mac or Windows computer, but the update process is a little bit more complicated than the other two. The other two, you just plug them in, it shows up as a drive, and you drag and drop the software onto the lens, it reboots, and it's on there. Where the Sigma one, it requires you to install some drivers and a program on your PC or your Mac to actually make that work. So that update process is a little bit more complicated than the other two. The other thing that's really important about these lenses is the mounts that they're available on. Now, these are all APS-C lenses. The Viltrox is available on Sony E, Fuji X, and Nikon Z. The TTArtisans right now is currently only on Fuji X and Sony E, where the Sigma is available on Sony E, Fuji X, Nikon Z, L-mount, Micro Four Thirds, Canon RF, and EFM. So there's a lot of users out there that these other two lenses aren't even options for. So if that's the case, then obviously the Sigma is your choice. Looking at the optical performance and starting with distortion, this is where the results get very, very interesting. So start with looking at the Viltrox, you get a very slight pin cushion distortion, but it's nothing too disturbing. It's nothing that I would even worry about correcting. It is so close to straight that it's irrelevant. You can correct it if you want, but you don't have to. The TTArtisans is near perfect. Like, I mean, those lines at the edge of frame are almost perfectly straight. So certainly that's one that you absolutely wouldn't have to correct. But looking at the Sigma, you get very heavy barrel distortion. Now, if you are editing these photos in Lightroom, Lightroom will auto-correct that for you. In some camera systems like Sony, it will also auto-correct for you. But if you're using a Fuji camera, and I'm not sure about the other lens manufacturers, the Fuji cameras won't do in-camera corrections on third-party lenses. That means that all your photos, all your videos are going to have significant barrel distortion, and you will need to correct that. And for that reason, if you're a Fuji shooter, this might make you lean towards the other lenses if you are worried about that barrel distortion. Having a look at Vignette, this is where we've got another wildly varying performance. At f1.8, the TTArtisans has the strongest Vignette. It is very, very heavy, and some of the heaviest Vignette I've seen out of any lens. The Viltrox is a little bit better, and the Sigma is the best. Now, I didn't shoot the Sigma at f1.4. These are all shot at f1.8, and since the Sigma is an f1.4 lens, it does make sense it would be a little bit better than the other two at f1.8. Looking at f2.8, the TTArtisan still is very strong. The Viltrox is now absolutely minimal, and the Sigma is almost completely gone or none. So that is definitely a win for the Sigma, but the Viltrox isn't too far behind. Going down to f4, the TTArtisans is still strong. So this is something we're going to notice about the TTArtisans. All of the images, unless you correct them, are going to have strong vignette, and that might be something you like or not like. That's really up to you, or something you're going to need to correct. The Sigma and the Viltrox are basically gone. There's no vignette whatsoever. And even stopping down to f5.6 and beyond, the TTArtisan still has noticeable vignette. Sigma and Viltrox are near perfect at this point. Now, another place that cheap lenses really suffered in the past was chromatic aberration, and something has changed recently in the design of these lenses, or these manufacturers' ability to design the lenses, because chromatic aberration is almost a non-issue now, even in the cheapest manual focus lenses out there. And at f1.8, none of them have any meaningful chromatic aberration to report, and they're all pretty much perfect. Even the most challenging real-world situations and shooting lens test charts, I did not see any chromatic aberration. Now, in the past, I have seen reports the Sigma at f1.4 does have the slightest amount of chromatic aberration, but I didn't see it in any real world. And even when I shot the test charts, I really couldn't find it. So my reports there would be there might be a little bit on the Sigma at f1.4, but all of them are perfect from f1.8 on. And even the Sigma at f1.4, it's not an amount that I would worry about or would really affect real world shooting. Looking at flare performance, this is a place where we are going to see another big difference, and this is going to be a big win to the Sigma. When we look at the Viltrox, we have a heavily backlit scene, and when the light of the sun hits that lens, it just washes out the whole image. You get a loss of contrast, and the image is really unusable. Looking at the TTArtisans, the image is even worse, and you get the same effect that you do with the Viltrox, but you get this purple color cast across the whole thing. So once again, that's the image that's not even usable. But looking at the Sigma, it is miles ahead. It holds its color and contrast really well. The images are perfectly usable. And I think this is one of the very big differences between these cheaper lenses and the Sigma, is this handling of the flare. Now, we got a slightly different result when I went into the church and I sort of pointed at some spotlights in the church. And what you'll see is with the Viltrox, it actually holds contrast pretty well. You get a blooming around the highlights, but these images are going to be perfectly usable. So car headlights and stuff like that, I think we're going to see a similar result. The TTArtisans has less blooming, but it has more artifacts. Those are the little dots sort of dancing around in your image, where it's actually hitting different lens elements in the lens and creating these little spots. And Sigma is by far the best, still the most controlled, still looks the best. But in this situation, the Sigma is the best, but the other two are still perfectly usable, where in the first situation, I would say the Sigma was the best and the other two were completely unusable. Looking at close-up image quality, this is another place that we are going to see a big difference, and we're going to see a win for the Sigma. The Viltrox has the second closest minimum focus distance, and at f1.8 wide open at the minimum focus distance, the image is very sharp and there's plenty of detail. The TTArtisans has the furthest minimum focus distance, and it's not quite as sharp, but it's still good and acceptable. And if you want sharper image quality with that lens, you really want to stop it down to f2.8 and beyond for the best results. The Sigma has the closest minimum focus by quite some margin. You can get much closer to the object, which means you're going to get a much bigger magnification, and it is the sharpest when shot at the minimum focus distance. So this is a clear win for the Sigma. If you want to do close-up pseudo macro shots, then the Sigma is going to be the lens for you. And also these lenses are all great for travel. So if you're doing food or product or anything where you want to capture some close-up details, the Sigma is the clear winner there. Now, looking at sharpness, I think you're automatically going to think, okay, the cheaper lenses aren't going to be as sharp. And as it turns out, that's actually not the case. And if we look at the Sigma at f1.4, just shooting a test chart, it is sharp, it's very good in the center frame, and we've got no chromatic aberration whatsoever. So the Sigma, you can shoot it wide open in the center, is great. When we stop down to f1.8, now we've got all the lenses involved. They are all acceptably sharp. The Sigma is the sharpest, then the Viltrox, then the TTArtisans. All are sharp enough when used in real-world results. You're not really going to notice the difference, but if you're shooting a test chart or pixel peeping, that's the order their sharpness is going to come in. And then stopping down to f2.8, the Sigma and the Viltrox are now very similar. I couldn't really tell them apart, but the TTArtisans is slightly behind. Once again, something you're going to really struggle to tell the difference in real world, but if you're shooting a test chart, you will notice the Sigma and Viltrox are a little bit sharper. At f4, they are all very hard to tell apart. They're all very similar. This same story at f5.6. So the sharpness on all of them is more than acceptable, but the Sigma is a little bit ahead. Now, when we go to the corners, this is where things get very interesting and things change. And this is the same result I got testing some previous 56mm lenses, comparing the Sigma, the Viltrox, and the TTArtisans. I got the same result. To start with, at f1.4, the Sigma is somewhat soft, but the corner contrast is good. And there is enough detail that I think it's fine. Now, when we get to f1.8, this is where things get interesting, because in the corner of frame, the Viltrox is actually the sharpest, and the Sigma and the TTArtisans are very, very similar. So now the most expensive lens and the least expensive lens have very similar corner sharpness, and the one in the middle is clearly sharper than the other two. So we're seeing, if you're going to shoot wide open and you're worried about edge of frame or corner sharpness, the Viltrox has jumped right out ahead of the other two. Then when we stop down to f2.8, the Viltrox is still the sharpest, and clearly so. Then the Sigma, then the TTArtisans. f4, we're getting a very similar result as f2.8, where the Viltrox is still the sharpest. And once you stop it down to f5.6, the Viltrox and the Sigma are very similar now. So the Sigma is kind of caught up, and the TTArtisans is still noticeably softer. So this is another feature of this TTArtisans lens. Not only do you have heavy vignette throughout the whole range of apertures, you're also going to get softer corners. Now, depending on what you're doing, this might not be a disadvantage, and I actually don't mind this. This gives this lens a little bit of specific character that I like, and you may or may not like. It is an optical imperfection, but it is a feature of the lens that I actually don't mind. Now, looking at the bokeh and background blur, this is another one that gets really, really interesting, and the results here, they might surprise a lot of people. They didn't surprise me because I kind of have done enough of these reviews that I know this happens. First of all, having a look at the general out of focus areas, you've got nice creamy out of focus areas, and you have a nice transition from in focus to out of focus areas. And when I compare the three lenses to each other in general out of focus backgrounds, it is very hard to tell the difference. They are almost identical, even when you put them side by side. So when it comes to general out of focus areas, I don't think there is any clear winner there. Looking at the bokeh and the out of focus specular highlights, this is where we actually see quite a significant difference. All have reasonably round bokeh balls in the center of frame, which turns into a cat's eye as you get close to the edge of frame. They either cat's eye a little bit more or a little bit less, but the shape is fairly similar across the different lenses. The Viltrox and the TTArtisan almost have a bit of a swirly bokeh effect with them, which I really, really like, and it looks quite cool. And that's probably just facilitated by the fact that they cat's eye a little bit more. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The TTArtisans has absolutely the clearest bokeh, or the cleanest bokeh of all of them, and it's not even close. There are no onion ringing or odd textures in those out of focus bokeh balls or highlights. It also has a slight bubble bokeh effect with a bit of a glowing ring around the outside of the bubbles. Now, whether you like that or not is personal preference, but most people don't like the onion ringing effect that the other two have. Now, keep in mind that I've cropped way in to show this, and in most real-world results, it's not going to be a big deal. But if you have big bokeh balls in the background, you are going to notice that you're going to get cleaner bokeh highlights out of the TTArtisan's lens. Now, one thing I want to touch on, but I can't really give you conclusive results on, is the autofocus performance. And the reason is I've got the TTArtisans and the Viltrox lens on the Fuji camera, and I've got the Sigma lens on the Sony camera. So I can't compare them head to head. But I have previously compared Sigma's 56mm to TTArtisan's and Viltrox 56mm. And from using these, I expect the lens or the autofocus results are going to be very similar to what I got out of those lenses. And this is what I found. Both the TTArtisans and the Viltrox lenses were very accurate. I had no problem with accuracy, but they were noticeably slower than the Sigma lens. The Sigma lens was quicker to find the subject and pick up the focus. It wasn't that the other two would miss or focus on something else or slightly miss the plane of focus. They were just a little bit slower getting there. And because of that, I would have said maybe they were 20 to 30% slower. And basically what I found in that previous test is with the Sigma lens, I almost didn't miss. It was near perfect. It was fast. It kept up with the subject. Even my dog running around, it was reasonably good at keeping up with the dog. But the other two lenses were slightly behind, and they would miss photos and miss videos, not because they were inaccurate, but because they were just that little bit slower. In making this video, I really wanted to figure out, do I think that these inexpensive third-party lenses are going to hurt Sigma sales? And I think the answer is almost 100% yes, because price-conscious buyers are going to find these lenses more than good enough, and in most real-world results, you're not even going to be able to tell the difference between these lenses and the Sigma. In addition to that, depending on what system you're using, like the Fuji, it doesn't do in-camera corrections, you are going to get a significantly barrel-distorted image with the Sigma, and you're going to get much straighter lines with these, which means that your in-camera JPEGs are going to look much more natural without the barrel distortion by using these other third-party lenses, because they're optically better at correcting the distortion in the image. Now, there are a number of ways that the Sigma is still better, and the first, I think the build quality is a little bit better than the other two. The flare performance is significantly better than the other two. I think the autofocus speed is likely going to be better, even though I haven't been able to compare these lenses directly. Based on my experience, I think that is going to be true. And when you buy a Sigma, you do get Sigma support network. You do get a company that's been around for a very long time is going to stand behind those lenses. You are going to get a warranty that you know you're going to have no problems claiming if you need to. And you're also likely to get better resale value. So I don't think this is a total loss to the Sigma. But for budget-conscious buyers or people that don't have in-camera corrections for distortion, I do think that the cheaper lenses might make more sense. Now, if you want to see that 56mm comparison video I did, which has these same three brands in, I've just thrown that video on screen now. That video also has the autofocus performance test and some real-world examples. So you can kind of check that out, and that'll give you kind of an idea what to expect from the autofocus from these three lenses as well.